Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, 15 Vetting Questions for a Scanning Company. I'm Will Whitney, and I'm going to be your host today, and we'll go right into it. So for today's webinar, first we're going to start with, of course, the purpose. So why are we doing this webinar? And the first item is to learn which questions you should ask of a potential scanning partner. So we understand that not everyone is an expert in digitization. You have these projects, you want to do something, you want to scan your records, but you're not sure what to do or how to do it. So we provide you with some questions that you can ask of potential scanning partners when you're doing that research. So that's the first purpose. The second, decide which questions matter most to you. We're giving you 15. That doesn't mean you have to use them all. It just gives you a couple arrows in your quiver to see which ones you may or may not want to ask as you go through that research. And then lastly, using these questions, at least part of it, is to find the right scanning partner. You feel that warm and fuzzy feeling. It's the right fit to move forward with someone that you trust and you believe they can do the job successfully. So we're going to go through, before getting into the actual questions, some nuts and bolts to make sure everything's going well here. So if you could please, anyone in the audience, just please raise your hand if you can hear me. And there's a little raise hand button in the Zoom sidebar. All right, excellent. Got some hands, so we're all set there. Please raise your hand if you can see my screen. You should be seeing the screen that says nuts and bolts. Hand or two there, perfect. So that means people are seeing it. So you are muted. You're not on video, so don't worry about that. Just use the chat tool in Zoom if you have a question. You can ask questions along the way, of course. If I see them, I will try to answer them when I see them. But if not, there's a time for Q&A at the end, and I will answer any unanswered questions at that point, and you'll have time to ask questions if you have any additional as we get to the end. All right, first, always a good question. What will my project cost? And the reason this is number one on here is not because price is the most important. That's not the case in all scenarios, but it is an important part because you want to get a ballpark. There's no reason to go down the rabbit hole of getting all the details, the specs, the nitty gritty of actually moving forward with a project if you don't know the ballpark. And you want to start big to small. So it might just be, I have 500 boxes. Just give me a ballpark price. It doesn't have to be a perfect per box or per page price. You just want to understand, is it $20,000? Is it $200,000? You want to make sure you're in the range before you go on to further steps of getting granular and finding out the details of the specifics for your project. So it's not necessarily the most important, but it's good to be on the right path so you don't go down that rabbit hole with a company and then you get to the point where cost comes up later. It's like, whoa, I didn't realize it was going to be this much. I can't do this, because then you're wasting your time and you're also spending time of a company that is not going to work with you. Just you're misaligned. So really, to get aligned before you get into detail, getting that ballpark. The next question, what's the scanning process? And although it's not necessarily critical that you know the exact details or have to have every single step of the way, but if you're handing over your record to someone, you want to know, do they have a process? Is it complete hamming and egging it where they're just doing things willy-nilly and kind of making up as they go, and just people are sort of doing things as they see fit? Or is there an actual process that the company follows when they do these projects? Not only is there a process, but is there a process for each type of project? And what I mean by that is you may have paper records. So what's the process for paper scanning? Let's say these are just office files and folders, folders, staples, etc. What's the process to receive the paper, prep it, scan it, index it, everything that goes along with that? But you may also have microfilm records. That process is not going to be the same as paper scanning. So is there a process for their microfilm or microfiche or capture cards, data migration, anything that you're working on? Is there a process for that? And not only do they have one, can they describe it? Anyone can, of course, say, yes, I have a process. That can mean you give me project, I do something. Or is it, yes, you give me project, step one's this, then step two, step three, through step whatever it is, and I can describe that process for your particular type of project. So you want to know, do they have one? Do they have one for the different types you're going to be working with? And then can they describe it to you? And if you have that question about describing it, and let's say you're talking to a account executive, a sales rep, as they describe it, Does it seem like they're sort of making up as they go along? Or is this, oh yeah, they sound like they got it, they know what the process is, they've done this a lot of times. It's clearly a utilized process that's very familiar. It's not just here, let me kind of make something up to sound good. Does it sound good or is it actually good? So what's the scanning process? Question 2. How do you protect my documents? You may think, or a lot of people think, well, this only applies to sensitive records. Sensitive records are important, of course, you want to protect those, but it's actually for all records, not only the type of data, like is it sensitive, but are you protecting them physically? So if you take my records with you, if I give them to you for a scanning project, how are they protected when they're in your facility, when you're actually working on the project? That doesn't necessarily have anything to do with sensitivity of the records, but are they just protected in general? Now, there's, of course, physical security about just protecting access to the records and digital security as well, but it all kind of comes part and parcel. So how are you protecting my documents when I trust you to scan them? When you take them away from me and you're doing a project, how are you protecting these? So I, again, using that term, get that warm and fuzzy that my records are okay while they're out of my hands. And of course, when you do get into sensitive records, maybe criminal justice information, so police reports, court records, you might have HIPAA data if you're a healthcare agency, student records, anything with extra sensitivity, that's a whole nother layer of protection. And of course, ask the questions of, well, sure, you can do a project with public information like newspapers. Of course, you're going to protect them. You don't want someone who's going there and start stealing anything, that they're physically protected. But with these sensitive types of records, how are they protected in that fashion? Are you following certain criteria to make sure access to these records is permission based? It's segmented, so not anyone can just access these at any time. How do people get in and out of your facility? All those questions relate to protecting the documents and data. Now, tied into that, anyone can say, we do this, but what proof do you have that you know what you're doing? And different proofs can be used for different items within a company's processes and operations. But of course, the proof, as we talked before, what are your processes for how you do your work? So that can be related to the actual scanning project. That can be related to onboarding, data security, whatever it is. What's the process for this specific operation within your company? What are the policies you have in place? Can you show me those? What sort of certifications you have? So we mentioned, let's say, healthcare data. Are you HIPAA compliant? If you're working with like police reports or criminal records, are you a CJIS listed vendor, which is Criminal Justice Information Services? So it's an FBI security policy that law enforcement agencies should be following for their records, because it's criminal justice information. Are you a CJIS listed vendor that can handle these records that I'm giving you? That's a type of certification. Do you get audited? There are a couple different types of audits. Internal. So what kind of auditing do you do of your own operations of your own company? Do you provide your own, do you execute your own audit? Some may, some may not. BMI has our internal audit, but then we also have, you can see this badge here, which is KP, stands for Kirkpatrick Price. That's the firm that provides our external SOC 2 Type 2 audit. So not only can we tell you, here's what we do, here are our policies, certifications, we have our own audit. Hey, it's like doing my own homework. Yes, I do my audit. Am I being truthful? Of course I say I am, but how do you trust me? You get an external audit, and we can provide you with proof that not only do we say we do this, but we had a third party come in and audit us, and they say we do it as well. So you want to make sure that the company you're researching, has proof that they're doing what they say they're doing. Question number 5, can you scan our documents on site? Of course, this only relates if you are looking to do on-site scanning. Maybe, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10% of folks that contact us ask this question. A lot of people just assume that it's going to be done at a scanning company's facility, but it is a question that does come up. And so if the answer is no, but you want it done on site, of course, that sort of makes the research process easy, not much to go further with them. If it's yes, then there are a couple different items that come into play. One is the environment. So if you ask, can you scan our documents on site? And let's say you're talking to me, I'd say, sure, let's talk about the project. And let's say the project makes sense, like it's a sizable enough project that would make sense to uproot our personnel, equipment, and whatnot, and get it to you and actually scan at your facility. But do you have the environment for that? So do you have the electricity, like the outlets and then ports for systems and the space to even do scanning? So if you have, let's say, a couple hundred boxes again, do you actually have a space for someone to come on site and do that? Some people actually don't. They say, hey, can you come here? Oh, I thought you'd just be kind of sitting next to me, sort of scanning with like a small scanner. The environment is important because production level scanners, companies like ours have, are much different than like a desktop scanner that you may be thinking of, which is how these projects work. We have production level high velocity scanners. Now you get into like microfilm and microfiche, it's a whole nother ball game of what types of equipment or what type of equipment has to get to you and be set up to make the project viable. That goes into logistics. How's everything getting there? It's not only getting machines there, having all that equipment, the environment set up, but also the personnel. So if we send folks out to your site, let's say it's in a different state, they may have to be there for a couple months. So it comes down to travel, hotel, getting in and out of your facility. If our people, we have a lot of folks, we actually have a 24-hour cycle. A lot of folks work early. Can we be at your office? Will you be able to open up for us at, let's even say it's 8 a.m. If your office doesn't open till noon and closes at 4, that's going to really make a difficult project because there's limited time to actually do the scanning. Can our people stay longer than your people? Is there someone that has to be watching them? All of these things come into play with logistics. And then, of course, cost. Typically, on site, you're going to be at least 30 to 50% more. Again, typically, it really depends on the project, but it's a significant increase from sending it to, let's say, again, BMI. You send it to us. We have the environment. We have all the machines set up. We have the people ready to go. They have workstations. We have entire rooms dedicated to scanning and doing the processing and whatnot. It's completely different when you have to move it somewhere else. You're not only uprooting people to send it there, but now they're only focused on that one job, your particular job. So they can't be working on other projects too. So there's that gap in capacity being moved from our facility to yours. So that ties into the cost as well. So some questions, if you're considering on-site scanning, you want to ask, can they do it? Yes or no? And then understand these questions may come up to you. How long does a scanning project take? Again, these are early on questions. This isn't the nitty gritty. If you actually are going down a further path of the company, you want to get more details, just at a high level. Let's use that example again, 500 boxes. Hey, how long does 500 boxes take to scan? If you're asking me, I'd say, well, once we do our milestone proof of concept process to make sure everyone's on the same page, once we get your approval, you're probably looking about 3 to 5 months. That'd be a ballpark. And then if that fits your timeline, great. If it doesn't, we start talking about that. But you're just getting that high level before getting into too much detail, because you need to know, how long is this thing even going to take? So you have the high level cost, then you have the high level timeline. What's standard? That, what I just told you, is likely a standard project, sort of, meaning we have other projects, we're working on dozens of projects at a time. So this is fitting into our current workflow. Now, if I say 4 to 5 months, you say, okay, well, it's what's today? It's May 22nd. I need to have myself moved out of my office by the end of June, and it has to be done by end of July. I would go, okay, that's possible, but we really have to ratchet it up a little bit, get this thing moving, and we can accommodate that. But that may come into, so you say you need this, it has to be out of the office by then and then done by this next month. So that's about a 2-month project. Can they do that? But then what goes into that as well? That may increase the cost a little bit, because now other projects could have to be bumped or moved around to accommodate your expedited timeline. Or there's the other direction, which may be, you say, yeah, 500 boxes, you can take all of them at once, but I don't need it done till the end of the year. So even though you say it takes 4 to 5 months, feel free to take 10 months or whatever that is. We may say, great, that's awesome. So it's kind of filler work. So if you don't need it right away, if I have extra capacity, I'll start working on this, just knowing I need to be done by the end of the year, let's say. So that coin can flip both ways, and that could be something that actually gets you a reduction in cost, because now it's something that we can move around as we need based on other work coming in. So how long does a project take? There'll be the standard timeline, and it's really what you need. It needs to be discussed. So what else is included in a scanning project? Of course, The scanning is the main part. That's what you're doing. You hear scanning, great, going analog to digital, getting my records in electronic format. But there's also other parts. So what's included in that, in the project? Am I just getting scanned and then I have to do everything else? Or is there post-processing like OCR? Is that included or not included? Can you do that? Framing of images. So this would tie more to like microfilm, microfiche, or potentially oversized documents that have to do overhead scanning. So framing, where if you have, actually I could probably give an example here. Let's just say, for instance, I have this piece of paper. And then I have this, let's say this is an image on, images on microfiche, 1, 2, 3, 4. Once you scan it, you have all this extra, basically border and the parts between the images. So framing, or called cropping as well, is then actually going and cutting out that image so only the image appears in the file you receive. So is that part of post-processing? Are you just getting unframed or uncropped images with that extra border and whatnot? Indexing, naming the digital files once they've been scanned. You need to be able to access them. So you need to have them with a file name so they're not just all randomly named and you don't know how to get to them. So what indexing is included? QA, so quality assurance, and QC, quality checks. What type of quality checks are done during the project, what standard, and then also if you want something specific, you can ask and that can be applied to the project. Then there's the deliverable, which might be PDFs, TIFFs, JPEGs, et cetera, et cetera. What kind of formats do you need? Is it can be on a hard drive or through SFTP, like an electronic transfer basically, or maybe you're accessing it via our, I say DR here, our digital reel hosted application. So what's all included in the project? You want to get a high level understanding of, if I say again, let's say, oh, it's $100,000 for X project. You say, okay, well, what's included? I'll give you something like this. Just, you're basically getting these things, but we of course have to get into details how they would all play out. But that's what you want to know early on. So what digital formats can you receive your images in? You may not care. You may be looking for suggestions, but what we call the traditional method is things like PDFs, JPEGs, TIFFs, and you could do like LZWs, PDFAs, things of that sort. When you think digital, you think, okay, a file, like a PDF file. There may be other formats, or another option is when I mentioned DR, so digital reel, this is our hosted application. So you may want traditional, or you say, I need a hosted system. I want to access these. I don't want them just sitting on a hard drive or on the network. So what can you provide? Other companies probably have other options. We would say, well, we have this digital reel option that's a secure hosted platform that you can use to access your records. You may get both. You might want a hybrid option where you're using a system, let's say again, DR, but you're also getting the cropped image, basically the traditional file deliverables for maybe a backup, or you have another system you're gonna load them to for some reason. So you want to know the digital formats you can receive them in and what options are available to you. This is becoming a lot more prevalent. There's if you need a file during the project, so you continue with the 500 boxes, you send us your records, 500 boxes worth, and they're semi-active, maybe some are more active than others, but you're not getting into them too much. But you get a request for a file and you're saying, well, I don't have them, they're not in my office. How do I fulfill this request if I don't have the records? So if you're wondering, how did you get those back? Do we mail it back to you? If you're local, do we drive it to you? Do you come pick it up? That is it's a concern we hear a lot, because once it's out of your hands, you feel kind of at a loss of what to do. So you want to know what can happen, or what happens if I do have a request? How do I get these files back? If you're working with us, we have our BMI request system, conveniently known as BRS. So it's an online request portal where you would just create a request. It's all a software program. So a request is created. You tell us what you need. It goes through a workflow. Our team sees the request, goes to locate the file. We prioritize that file that you're requesting, scan it, and get it back to you. Either if you're accessing digital reel, let's say that's part of the project, we'll load it to there, or we may send it to you electronically through an FTP transfer process. But we'll get you the file based on your request, even when you don't have them in your hand. So we see this a lot more in the past couple of years than we had the previous number of years. So this could be from microfilm, microfiche, paper records, books, whatever it is. We're just getting a lot of requests. So we create this application. So it's a simple, streamlined process for you to make the request. We can go fulfill it, get it to you, so then you can do whatever you need to do on your end to get it to the person that's asking for it. But that's definitely a question that you should ask. How do you get me records if I need it during the project? All right. What's your experience with document scanning? So if there's a document scanning company, of course, we'll say, well, we scan documents. Of course you do. But you want to know how long you've been doing it. So longevity doesn't always equate to quality or how good the company is or is going to be for your project, but it's a decent indicator. They've been around for 2 months. They drive up in a van to your office and say, hey, here's our scanning company, and we're just going to scan it right here in your parking lot, and we've been around for 2 months. Maybe that's okay, maybe it's not. Again, longevity doesn't necessarily mean anyone's better than the other, but if you've been around a while, that does have an indicator that you've been successful over the number of years and you're doing something right. So you want to know, well, how long have you been doing it? That's one. How many projects either have you done or are you doing on a monthly basis is a good indicator. So if you're hearing X per month, if you say, well, I do 1 per month. Okay, if you're doing 1 per month, am I your one customer? So you're only, and it's a 3-month project, so you have 4 customers a year. How much experience do you have in this? That could be an indicator. If it's we're running 20 projects, 30 projects a month, great. You say, okay, you see a lot of these, you've done a lot of them, perfect. But not only how many, but are those projects like yours? If you have 5,000 rolls of microfilm, how many projects have you done? Oh, we've done hundreds of projects. Well, how many that are roughly 5,000 or more microfilm rolls? Oh, well, we haven't done any. So it's not just projects, it's which projects like mine have you done as well? And of course, how many projects have you run? And we've been around for over 6 decades. So I could probably find out how many actual projects, but it's in the tens of thousands by now. It's kind of like the McDonald's, we sold 1 billion burgers. So I think going down to the a monthly or an annual basis would be more useful than just forever. But I think this is an essential one, is like me. If 99% of this company's projects are very small, but you have a large one, that could be something to be aware of. Just not necessarily a red flag, but you just want to know, okay, so you do a lot of projects that aren't like mine. Or if a company is constantly doing massive projects and you have a really small one and they say we can do it, okay, that's fine, but are they going to keep the same eye on it because there's a small piece of the pie? You just want to know, what are you doing like mine? Can you give me some examples? And that's a useful way to figure out their experience with document scanning. Samples may or may not be critical to you, but samples could be useful not only for the company. Like I like when my customers send samples because I get to actually see what we're working with, because sometimes it varies from what we're being told, not by the fault of anyone. It's just a lot of this material is not what people focus on every day. So they believe it's something, but then we get something else. It's good to see a sample first. Plus, you get to see the quality of what will come out at the end, and you see what's included. So what's included in that sample. In our case, so we build process flows for every project. We're not going to necessarily build a process flow for a sample. It's going to be more hand done because we're just trying to show you the quality of the scans and then do some basic indexing to discuss, okay, here's what we found. Here's how we could do it. Do you have any questions? But you're really looking at just the general quality of it. How long will a sample take? Is it a couple days, a couple months? What should a sample take? Typically, it's a few weeks because it has to get in. We have to put it into our, again, this is just speaking on BMI. I'm not covering every single company, but from my personal experience, it's typically a week or so. So we get materials, it's usually a small batch. Let's say we're doing microfilm. We might get 3 or 4 rolls just to get that sample in. Take about a week or two, get it into a format, maybe PDFs, get some indexing, and then we do a review of it to talk about how to move forward. And then something that a company like ours is always wondering is, okay, if I do a sample, are you pretty much ready to move forward? It's not essential that you have to, because sometimes you may not know until you see the sample, but you don't want to be having folks do a lot of extra work if you're not even close to work doing the project. So if you're thinking, hey, let's do a sample, we do it, review it, you say, hey, that looks great. And then I ask, great, what's the next step? Ready to move forward? Are we looking in the next month or two to get into the details, the scope, contract, etc.? And you say, oh, no, this is like 2 years away. Probably don't want to do a sample yet. It should be something that's semi-recent or semi coming up soon. I had something I'm sure genius to say about the samples. One more thing, but I cannot think of it at the moment. If I do think of it, I'll come back. But now I'm thinking about it. Anyway, we'll move on. What kind of customer support do you provide? So I consider sort of 3 types. There's pre-project, during, and post-project. So you just want to know, if you contact us with a project, we're going to link you up with one of our account executives. So in our case, that is your customer support prior to the project. You were working with our account executive, scoping the project. They're asking questions about what you need to have done, going back and forth on how it would get done, pricing, et cetera, et cetera. So in our case, that's typically what the customer support is. Now, if there's a sample or maybe there's a pilot project of sorts, then you may have other people involved. But pretty much throughout your entire journey with BMI, if you work with us, it's the account executive, your sales rep, that's going to be your primary point of contact. But even though you can always go to them during a project, you'll be hearing from potentially our milestone project architect. So the person that creates that initial workflow and the testing of your project, you'll hear from her most likely when we send out approvals, or if there are any questions, again, with the sales rep involved. Maybe our production manager will be involved. And then once a project gets approved in that milestone 1, we call it our M1, then it'll be handed off to the project manager that will then execute the remainder of the project, basically the bulk of it. So you'll be hearing from project managers, potentially our production manager, your sales rep, and then if there's software involved or hosting from our digital reel application, software folks may be involved too. Finance when bills go out and things like that. Contracting, you'll have all be involved in contracting most likely. And so different people during the project. And then post-project, of course, again, your account executive is always a great person to go to. But then we have our customer support folks, like our IT people, that will help you if any issues with anything that you need adjudicated, or you're having a problem getting into, let's say, digital reel, whatever it is, we have that post-project support. So you want to know who's involved and what kind of support's provided pre, during, and post-project. Do you use subcontractors? I believe we all do. BMI definitely does. If somebody doesn't, we'd be very surprised. We can't guarantee that everyone does, but I'm pretty sure they do. But how do you use them? Now, subcontractors are folks that will, so if you're working with us and we're doing a 100,000 microfiche, we're likely going to have a subcontractor or subcontractors do pieces of that project. So we're your primary contractor, but we may have pieces of the project sent to subcontractors because of their scale, their efficiency, and of course it helps with cost, not only to us, but then it helps cost you. Because some things are just better done at the scale that subcontractors can do, because they're focusing on very repetitive, large scale tasks that are typically more efficiently done by them and at a better cost. So how do you use them is important. So questions to ask related to subcontractors, not just do you use them, but how do you vet them? How long have you been working with them? What's your process to audit them? Are they even part of an audit? And then what types of tasks are subcontractors typically involved in? So most likely, if you're doing a digitization project, there will be a subcontractor involved. It may be, you may not see it right up front, but in the background, you think, yes, there's probably a subcontractor doing something somewhere. But if there is one, you just want to know, well, if you're sending them information for, let's say, indexing, is it protected? How is it protected? You can get answers around those if you're concerned about it. If it's something like, again, newspaper images, for instance, that's not something you're probably concerned about. But if it's sensitive data, you may be very concerned. Well, how are these subcontractors involved? How are they vetted? How long have you been working with them? What's the process? disaster recovery plans. So we're coming up on 14. We have one more after this. Now, disaster recovery plan is basically if something bad happens, how do the operations get back up to speed? How is the data protected? Is it backed up? And so on and so on. So you must protect the data. It's not just a disaster recovery plan for the company. So BMI would be, yes, if there's an earthquake at our, let's say, headquarters facility, what happens? It shakes the building up, power goes out. How long will it take to be up and running again? If we're hosting, what happens to the hosted data sets if that server goes down? Well, in our case, there's a second server site geographically located about 150 miles away. So that one is likely not going to be affected by the same thing that happens at our headquarters. So if you're hosting and there's a disaster, there may be a little bit of downtime, but are your records still backed up? Are they secure? And then are they accessible? That's part of a disaster recovery plan. If the operations go down because scanners or scanning rooms are affected, how long will it take to get them back up and running so your project can be moved on, completed? Is the data backed up? And if there's already, let's say, some scanning, if it's already been done, do we have to redo it, or is it protected somewhere because there is a backup plan? So it's a lot of it's related to the data itself and making sure the data is safe, but also reigniting the operations to continue on making sure the access to those records is available. So we have a disaster recovery plan, but it's also good for, whichever organization you work at. Do you have a disaster recovery plan for your records? Because before they're scanned, let's say you have 500 boxes and they're in a room. What if that room catches on fire? Is there a duplicate of these records somewhere? Were they already digitized and these are just kind of in stores that are going to be destroyed anyway? What's the plan for that? Part of that plan could be, we need to get these digitized and then have multiple copies so the digital files are backed up. This is all just part of that, having a plan in case of disaster, because you can't plan for accidents. Well, you can plan for them, but you don't know when they're going to happen. And then more administrative, but you can always ask, what kind of insurance do you have? Because stuff happens. Insurance is there to kind of help when something goes wrong. We have insurance covering various items, commercial general liability, cyber insurance, things of that sort. But always think, if you're doing this with a customer, you may ask, what kind of insurance do you cover if something happens to my records while you're scanning them? It's always good to also have your own insurance coverage for your records, because even if the company has insurance, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get paid out. It all comes down to the insurance company, what they believe the documents are worth and what you get in some sort of settlement. But it's good to know, does the company have insurance? I mean, that should be kind of a checkbox, like, yes, they do. Okay, good. We don't want to work with someone that doesn't have any at all. But it's always good to have your own insurance for your records as well before you start a project. Recommendation, don't have to do it, but absolutely make sure the company you work with does have insurance, because you can't guarantee nothing will happen. Of course, no one wants anything to happen to records, but it can. That's why insurance is around. Make sure they have it. So that is number 15. So as I mentioned, those are 15 questions you can ask. It's not like necessarily a make or break thing if you don't ask these questions. It's just a lot of people don't know what to ask when they start a project. So those are just things you can put in your back pocket and have a few ideas to, when you're researching potential scanning partners, say, hey, I have a few questions for you, maybe take 4 or 5 or 6, whatever, and ask them those questions, see what the answers are. And again, always look for that warm and fuzzy. It's that whole trust. If you don't trust what they're saying, you don't believe them, you don't get that good feeling, there's a reason you have those hackles back there, that gut instinct. So just, those are some questions you can start with. And of course, you should have your own to really be specific to your project. So I'm going to see if there are any questions right now. I do not see any questions, but as I wrap up here, if you think of one, go ahead and throw it up there, and I will check one more time before I close out. So again, I'm Will. This is the easy version of my email. So if you want to contact me about a project or about questions related to the webinar or going into detail on some of the things I talked about, you can email me there. If you have a cell phone on you, bring up the camera, hover over this QR code. That will send you to our newsletter. It goes right to the side. You just put in your email. You can opt out anytime. It's every other Tuesday. You get an email if you're part of our subscriber list. One just went out yesterday. It's just up-to-date information about new blogs, videos, webinars like this that are coming up, things related to digital imaging content. So go ahead and sign up for that if you want to get more information in the future. And one more check on questions. I don't see any. So thank you for joining today. I appreciate you being here. Hope you got something from it. And we'll see you next time.